Jambo, this Kihumba Moya, and in this video we'll look at equilibrium as well as disequilibrium, but we shall start with equilibrium. The objective that we hope to have achieved at the end of this session, or the learning outcomes, is that the learner should be able to describe the nature of market equilibrium and disequilibrium, and explain changes in market equilibrium and disequilibrium. We shall, however, look at disequilibrium at a different video. When we want to study equilibrium, our objective is to determine the market price and quantity and try to identify forces that influence such price and quantity. We define equilibrium as a situation where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. That is, QD is equal to QS. There are two ways that we can determine equilibrium. One of the ways is by graphically determining it, and the other is mathematical. We shall look at both mathematical determination of equilibrium and graphical determination of equilibrium. Graphically, equilibrium is determined at the point where the demand curve and supply curve intersects. And we could show that in this format. We have the demand curve, the supply curve, and we have the demand curve. The point where the two meet, or the point where the two intersect, is the equilibrium, and the price at that point is known as equilibrium price and quantity equilibrium quantity. It can be seen that forces of demand and supply determine price in the market. That is, price at which quantity equals quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. And as we've mentioned, that price is known as equilibrium price and the quantity as equilibrium quantity. Should the price move away from equilibrium position, for instance, if price went up to P1, we'll end up with a disequilibrium. And we find at higher prices, more will be supplied, but less will be demanded. The suppliers, because of the higher price, would want to supply more, whereas the consumers will want to buy less because now price is high, thus creating a situation of excess demand, or a situation where supply exceeds demand. Market forces will try to rectify that situation and pushes us back to equilibrium. And how does it do that? How it does that is that at those higher prices, P1, where we have excess supply, consumers will be only willing to buy Q1, while the sellers will be willing to supply Q2 hence creating supply. What will happen to rectify the situation? To rectify the situation, there will be forces that will push the prices down until such a time equilibrium price is reached. And how that happens, suppliers will want to reduce the price in order to encourage consumers to buy more. And prices will drop until point PE, which is our equilibrium point. It's possible that this equilibrium would have been arisen as a result of price going below equilibrium price, probably price P2, thus creating excess demand or shortages. This should be price P2, thus creating excess demand or shortages. And what will happen? Suppliers will consider that price too low and they will not want to supply the market. Whereas, on the other hand, consumers will consider that price to be just right, and therefore they'll want to buy more. For the market to correct itself, the forces of demand will push the price up until equilibrium is restored. Because of the shortages, consumers will compete among themselves, and that will push prices up, and we end up with our equilibrium being restored. That was graphical determination of equilibrium. But we can also determine equilibrium mathematically. We've been given the demand function, and the demand function is always QD, quantity demanded, is equal to 3,000. Well, this is a coefficient, and it will always be positive, but demand will always be negatively related with price. On the other hand, supply is positively related with price. How to solve that mathematically is simply to equate the two equations. And when we do, because you know that at equilibrium quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, we end up with this equation. 3,500 minus 266p is equal to 1,526p plus 240p, which when we solve, it will be 2,024, which should be equal to 540p. And if we are able to solve equilibrium price as for 2,024, we divide that by 540, that will give us an equilibrium price as for. To determine equilibrium quantities and price, we simply substitute for equilibrium, and this should have been subtraction, sorry for that. We simply substitute for equilibrium in the equations, for price in the two equations that we have. And at the end of it, we shall find that our equilibrium quantity is 2,486. Equilibrium can be stable. It will be stable if any forces that will disrupt the market equilibrium, it sets out adjustments in motion that takes us back to the original equilibrium that we had. And this is the type of equilibrium that we had previously. It could be unstable if any forces, if any deviations from it set up forces that pushes us further and further away from it. Examples of unstable equilibrium is case of exceptional demand curve and exceptional supply curve, which we looked at other videos. It could be neutral, and it is neutral when we have disturbances, market forces push us towards it. And this happens when we have either demand curve or supply curve shifting. I repeat, neutral equilibrium will happen when we have demand curve and supply curve, or supply curve or both shifting. And this is one of the examples. Our initial curves are DO and SO, where initial equilibrium is PE and QE. If there's an increase in supply, which is represented by a shift to the right of the supply curve, initially we have excess supply, but market forces pushes us to a new equilibrium. All right, and this can be repeated either by shifting demand or whichever session or whatever curve would shift, or even simultaneous. Thank you for watching. Remember, at the end of this, you can share the video, please subscribe, and share with your colleagues. If in the event of any questions, please send them to me. Thank you.